yet another intro created by my good friend Latrice Williams, to whom I have to say thank you very much once again. You know, at the same time, something else feels a little different. Ah! Alright, so now that we're over that initial shock, also I have no idea why my chair was set higher. Anyway, this is going to be my first in a line of many reviews that are going to be posted this October. I'm going to work on posting one per day. We'll see how that goes. And each day I'm going to look at a classic film from the horror, science fiction, or thriller genre and compare it to its remake. And I've mentioned this before, but I'll go ahead and say it again for those of you who missed it. I'm only talking about movies that I like, going both ways. So I won't be talking about I Spit on Your Grave, because I personally didn't care for the original. And I'm not going to be talking about The Omen, because the remake of that sucks hairy balls. So with that out of the way, the first pair that I'm going to be comparing is Little Shop of Horrors, the black and white movie versus the musical. So, first of all, I'm going to touch on what the original did better. First of all, I just like the overall supporting cast in the original. The remake does have a lot of fun characters that pop up, like the Greek chorus, and it's also got some great cameos by celebrities like John Candy and such, but I loved the, reoccurring characters that kept showing up in the original, like, I can't remember her name, but there's that lady whose relatives just keep dying, and she keeps having to come into the flower shop to, get flowers for their funeral. And then there's that guy who shows up to buy some carnations. I thought that, his scenes were pretty hilarious, and I loved his smart-ass dialogue. And, just overall, the side characters at least, were more fun in the original. Also, Mr. Mushnick is a lot funnier in the original. Like, I love just how fast his dialogue is. Like, every time somebody has something to say to him, he replies in like a split second without even thinking about it. And I love how mean he is to Seymour. That's, one of the things that makes him a lot funnier. In the musical version, he's just kind of there, He does do some things to move the plot forward, like that scene where he catches Seymour in the act, and it's like his last scene in the movie. But other than that, can you really remember anything else that he does in the musical? Just the version that we got in the original was a lot funnier. Like, one bit that comes to mind is when, Seymour becomes a success after bringing Audrey 2 into the shop. Mushnick says that Seymour is his son now, but then when it looks like Audrey 2 is dying, his attitude just immediately changes, and it's pretty hilarious. Alright, so now let's go ahead and adjust this fucking camera, and let's get into what the remake does better. For one thing, I'm just going to get this out of the way. I know it's really unfair to even compare this, but the soundtrack to the musical version is a lot better. I typically enjoy horror musicals, but it's not all the time that I find one in which I enjoy the soundtrack just as much as the movie. Like with Phantom of the Opera and Sweeney Todd, I enjoy the songs while I'm watching those movies, but like Little Shop of Horrors is one of the only ones where it actually has songs that I'll download to my phone because they're that good. And with that out of the way, one thing that the movies share, more in common with each other is the character of Audrey, the love interest of the story. In the original, she is, nice and likable, and she's also a bit of a pushover. Like, she is just a complete kiss ass towards Seymour. And there's really not much motivation behind it, to tell the truth. In the musical version, she's actually more of a victim, which I know isn't a very strong character trait, especially when you're giving it to a female character, but at least they gave her something. I mean, there are people like that, unfortunately, who exist in the real world who are in these toxic relationships and actually kind of need a Seymour to save them. And, this actually gives Seymour much more of a motivation for, letting Audrey 2 talk him into doing these bad things, which, that's ultimately why I think she's a much stronger character in the musical version. And of course, I've got to touch on Seymour Krelborn, who doesn't really go through too much of a drastic change in the musical. He's still clumsy, he's still kind of a loser who gets talked into doing these bad things by a man-eating plant. But he is a little more likable. Like, he is more of a hero who you can get behind. I kind of like the one in the original too, mostly just because of how funny he was, but at the same time, he was just so spineless and pathetic that, there just wasn't really a whole lot of depth to his character, which is fine considering that, it was a comedy and he was really just serving to, make it a comedic story. But, I like how they give him a little more depth in the musical. Again, there's the fact that he has more of a motivation for doing these bad things when he starts thinking about Audrey and what she's going through. And of course, I've got to bring up the dentist in both of the movies. Again, it's just a matter of, how memorable each character is. And honestly, I can't think of, like, a single line of dialogue that the dentist said in the original. I just remember him being a jerk and being vaguely sadistic. In the remake, he's connected into the story by being Audrey's boyfriend, and on top of being this abusive asshole, he's also just a complete dumbass. And, seeing that stupidity in the character, as well as how much joy he takes in torturing his patients, does make him a lot funnier. And strangely, Steve Martin almost makes him kind of lovable in a way. And yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say about the dentist. Moving on. And then another character who I need to bring up is the dentist patient, who, is actually the closest fight that these two movies have with each other, because they're both very memorable performances. He wasn't actually in the stage production of Little Shop of Horrors when they adapted it into a musical, but they brought him back for the movie. And then they took out that awesome song that the dentist had to sing as he was suffocating. So in my book, it kind of evens out. I know that a lot of people would argue that anything with Bill Murray is better, but I really love that song.
Don't be fooled if I should giggle like a sappy, happy dope. It's just the gas. It's got me high. But don't let that fact deceive you. Any moment I could die.
But yeah, in the original, the patient is played by Jack Nicholson, who is a great actor. But, in most movies that he's been in, he's usually just kind of playing himself in a way. I would say that he was the most transformed and least recognizable in Little Shop of Horrors, and it didn't even require any kind of makeup or anything. It was just his mannerisms and his voice and everything. He just turned into a different person. And he was also a lot creepier than Bill Murray was in the musical version. So his character is definitely worth watching, but I just love how much more lively Bill Murray did the character. He was just a lot more... I can't, think of a great way to describe it. I guess the best way to put it, he was like more joyful, almost childlike in how much he wanted to get his teeth done and, feel this pain that the dentist was about to put him through. And, during that scene, Bill Murray and Steve Martin did a lot of ad-libbing back and forth, and it's just amazing to listen to. And of course, I need to touch on Audrey II, who was done way better in the musical version. And Audrey II is pretty funny in the original as well, but he doesn't really do much more than just act like a jerk to Seymour, and 99% of his dialogue is just feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me. He says a lot more in the musical version and sings a lot more, and memorable is pretty much the word of the day, but the dialogue from him is just a lot more memorable. And he has much more of an attitude. There's more of a sense of humor with what he's doing. He's one of those villains who has the classic evil laugh, which just makes him so much more entertaining. And the special effects are about the most perfect that I've ever seen in a movie. And they hold up really well. Even when I'm watching the movie today and I'm looking at Audrey II moving around and talking, I don't just see a giant puppet. Like, I see a living, breathing creature. And I even watched the commentary track right after I rewatched the movie for this series. And they had to put a lot of work into the puppet naturally. One thing that I didn't know before now was that... during the scenes where actors were interacting with the plant, they had to, move and talk really slowly. And when you're watching this sped up film in the movie, it's just absolutely seamless. And I can't help but just applaud everyone who was involved. So, once again, Audrey II is a lot better in the remade version of the film. So, in the end, I think it's pretty obvious that this isn't even a close race. The musical version is a lot better. And when I was answering this question a while back about which movies never lose their watchability, Little Shop of Horrors was one of those movies which I completely forgot about when I was contemplating the video. It's definitely a movie that never gets old for me, but if you get the chance to watch the original as well, it's very worth it. It's a very well-made comedy. It's a lot of fun, but the musical just completely trumps it. And that's all I've got to say about Little Shop of Horrors. Stay tuned for tomorrow's comparison. I hope y'all have a good one.